They didn't just plan genocide. They built brothels inside death camps, murdered their own children in a bunker, and turned paperwork into a weapon. How deep did the sickness inside Hitler's inner circle really go? Heinrich Himmler, the go-to person of Hitler's inner circle, didn't start as one of history's most feared men. In fact, before rising through Nazi ranks, he was a failed chicken farmer with a background in agriculture and a fascination for astrology, ancient mythology, and racial science. But once he found his place under Adolf Hitler, Himmler quickly transformed into the cold mastermind behind some of the most horrific crimes of the 20th century. As head of the SS, he built an organization devoted to enforcing Nazi racial policies with terrifying precision. What made Himmler particularly dangerous wasn't just his power, it was the way he merged personal beliefs in Aryan supremacy and Nordic mythology with state machinery. He truly believed that Germany's destiny was tied to purifying the race and eradicating those he deemed subhuman. Himmler was responsible for creating the network of concentration and extermination camps across Nazi-occupied Europe. Under his leadership, mass murder became a factory-like operation, with train schedules, death quotas, and medical experiments all running under a horrifying sense of bureaucratic normalcy. He was also the one who institutionalized sexual slavery within the camps, setting up brothels to reward prisoners and troops. Despite orchestrating genocide, Himmler barely showed emotion. He often visited death camps and carried on with formal inspections like it was a routine business trip. Toward the end of the war, sensing Germany's defeat, he even tried to secretly negotiate with the Allies behind Hitler's back, hoping to save himself. It didn't work. When he was captured in 1945, he took a cyanide capsule and died instantly, escaping trial, but not history. Joseph Goebbels didn't kill with bullets. He did it with words, images, and manipulation. As Hitler's Minister of Propaganda, Goebbels was the voice behind the Nazi machine. He controlled every newspaper, every film, every radio broadcast in Germany. He twisted reality to make the public believe Jews were their enemies, that Hitler was a savior, and that war was a noble cause. Goebbels had a gift for words, but he used it to spread hate and reshape the minds of millions. He made lies sound like truth, and genocide sound like patriotism. He wasn't just a political operator, he was obsessed with power, fame, and most of all, with Hitler himself. His devotion bordered on fanaticism. Even when Hitler lost faith in others, Goebbels stayed by his side until the very end. Privately, Goebbels was a mess of contradictions. He pushed Nazi ideals of moral purity while having countless affairs. His marriage to Magda Goebbels was more like a public alliance, but together they projected the image of the ideal Nazi family. What they did in their final days remains one of the most haunting parts of the Third Reich's collapse. As Soviet troops closed in on Berlin in 1945, Goebbels and his wife killed their 6 children using poison in the Führer bunker. After that, they took their own lives. The fact that he could murder his own children just to remain loyal to a lost cause said everything about how warped his mind had become. Even in death, he tried to preserve the image of a perfect Nazi world, built on delusion and soaked in blood. Hermann Göring started off as a World War I flying ace and national hero, but by the time World War II ended, he had become a symbol of Nazi corruption, excess, and moral collapse. He was one of the first to join Hitler and played a key role in helping the Nazis rise to power. Once Hitler became Chancellor, Göring wasted no time grabbing titles. He was head of the Luftwaffe, German Air Force, founder of the Gestapo, and later designated Hitler's successor. But while other Nazis were driven by ideology, Göring seemed more addicted to luxury and status. He wore elaborate uniforms, collected stolen art from across Europe, and lived in palaces while the rest of the country suffered. As the war dragged on, Göring's drug addiction, especially to morphine, started to take its toll. His once sharp military mind became clouded, and his behavior grew increasingly erratic. Though he was the architect behind the early structure of concentration camps and played a major role in the early persecution of Jews, he became more of a fading star as the war continued. Hitler began losing trust in him, especially after Göring tried to take control when he thought Hitler was dead during the bombing of Berlin. That move infuriated Hitler and marked the end of Göring's influence. After the war, Göring was captured and stood trial at Nuremberg. Found guilty of crimes against humanity, he was sentenced to hang. But just before his execution, he took a cyanide pill, choosing to die on his own terms, still clinging to control, even at the very end. Martin Bormann didn't give speeches. He didn't wear flashy uniforms. Most Germans didn't even recognize his face, but behind the scenes, Bormann was one of the most powerful men in the Third Reich. He wasn't in charge of the army or the SS, but he controlled something even more dangerous: access to Hitler himself. Every message, every appointment, every memo had to go through Bormann first. This control gave him the ability to manipulate what Hitler saw, heard, and believed. Over time, Bormann became the gatekeeper of the Führer's world, shaping policies and decisions from behind the curtain. His loyalty to Nazi ideology was absolute, but it had a dark edge. He hated Christianity, dismissed human rights, and believed the state should crush all weakness. His version of loyalty was cold, brutal, and fanatically efficient. He weaponized paperwork like a scalpel. He didn't need to shout orders, he buried people under orders, regulations, and legal technicalities. Entire groups of people were condemned by memos with his initials. He saw cruelty not as a flaw, but as a necessary function of power. To Bormann, compassion was weakness, bureaucracy was a weapon, and he knew exactly how to use it. After the war, Bormann vanished. His disappearance created one of the biggest Nazi mysteries. Was he in South America? Did he escape with secret files? It wasn't until 1972, when construction workers in Berlin uncovered a skeleton, that the truth came out. He died in 1945 trying to flee, his story ending not with justice, but with dust. Albert Speer was often called Hitler's architect, but that title barely scratches the surface. He didn't just build buildings, he helped build the Nazi war machine. After winning Hitler's favor with his clean, modern designs, Speer was given more power than any architect should ever have. He eventually became Minister of Armaments and War Production, overseeing factories that ran on the backs of slave labor. Speer liked to paint himself as the smart Nazi, the technocrat who wasn't part of the killing. After the war, during the Nuremberg trials, he admitted moral responsibility but denied knowing about the Holocaust. He claimed he was too focused on blueprints and numbers to notice the mass murder happening around him. Many people bought it. His memoirs became bestsellers. But the truth was darker. Documents and later testimony showed he knew more than he ever admitted. He was present at meetings where slave labor was discussed. He personally inspected concentration camps and used their prisoners to boost production. He wasn't just complicit, he was efficient, even proud of how much he increased output. His biggest talent wasn't architecture, it was self-preservation. He managed to convince the world he was different from the rest. But beneath the calm tone and clean hands was a man who kept the Nazi machine running. He may not have pulled the trigger, but he made sure the guns never ran out of bullets. The myth of the good Nazi didn't just help Speer escape the gallows, it helped him rewrite history. Eva Braun didn't hold political power. She wasn't a soldier or a party leader. She was Hitler's girlfriend, tucked away in the background of Nazi history. But her story says a lot about what happens when someone chooses comfort and fantasy over conscience. She knew what was happening. She heard the stories. She just chose to ignore them and stay. She lived in luxury at the Berghof while millions were being murdered across Europe. While ghettos burned and gas chambers filled, Eva sunbathed, posed for photos, and hosted tea parties. She created her own dream world where none of it existed, and when photographers came around, she smiled like a star in a fairy tale. That smile was broadcast to millions. Some argue she was just a bystander, but she wasn't silent. She played a part in shaping the image of Hitler as a kind, calm leader. Her life was filled with denial, but that denial helped soften the image of the Nazi regime. She turned horror into normalcy by pretending it wasn't real, and she stayed with Hitler not out of fear, but out of love. In one of the most disturbing chapters of Nazi history, the SS didn't just kill and torture, they set up brothels inside concentration camps. These weren't isolated horrors, they were part of a cold, organized system created by Heinrich Himmler to control, humiliate, and reward. In Himmler's eyes, sex could be weaponized. It was a way to maintain discipline, boost morale, and reinforce Nazi racial ideology, all while treating women like disposable property. The Nazis called these places incentive brothels, but in truth, they were just factories of abuse hiding behind bureaucratic labels. Women were not chosen by accident. They were inspected, stripped, and examined like animals. Most were political prisoners, sex workers, or women accused of violating Nazi moral codes. Jewish women were excluded, not out of mercy, but because the Nazis viewed them as racially impure. Others, often from Poland, France, and the Soviet Union, were picked based on appearance and health. They had no choice. If they refused, they were beaten, starved, or sent to worse camps. If they agreed, they were forced into sexual slavery under the constant threat of death. So, what are your thoughts about this? Let us know in the comments below.